Hey guys, tonight we're starting with a great civilization, where the fatter you were, the closer you were to the gods. A place where a big belly wasn't shameful, but a national symbol, and where history truly left behind a layer of eternal fat. Pharaohs were often obese, and the Egyptian diet, mostly beer, wine, bread, and honey, was overflowing with sugar. And yes, they were fat, very fat. Ancient Egypt, cradle of pyramids, temples, and papyrus scrolls preserving millennia of knowledge, was also a place that carved statues of men who were too round to ride a chariot, too heavy to sit long in ceremonies, and sometimes too fat to be mummified smoothly. We used to believe pharaohs were superhuman beings, strong, wise, blessed by Ra, and protected by Anubis. But then modern science, with CT scanners, 3D modeling, and snarky microscopes, showed up, knocked on tombs silent for 3,000 years, and said, "Oh, looks like this guy had severe atherosclerosis. And this one, wow, his cholesterol was insane." Before you get too comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you actually enjoy this. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's joining us from across the world. And now we begin the journey. Fat pharaohs and the things mummies don't want you to know. You're living in Thebes, year 1400 BC. You're a stonemason, a baker, or if your luck is golden, someone honored to carry water inside the palace. Every day, you eat barley bread hard as tomb tiles, drink beer thick as porridge to avoid thirst, and endure sun so harsh, even your eyeballs want to change professions. And then, in the middle of a packed temple square, you see the pharaoh, seated high on a golden palanquin, draped in pure white cloth. A stern face, commanding hands, and beneath those hands, a sacred round belly, shining clearly in the sunlight. Yes, in ancient Egypt, a potbelly wasn't mocked, it was worshipped. They carved statues of Hapi, god of the Nile, with a chubby body like a flood-season water jar. Ptah, the creator god, was painted with rounded shoulders, a protruding belly, standing, as firm as belief in tax season. In the minds of the people, a full figure was a sign of prosperity, of a harmonious universe, and of Ra being pleased with the national calorie count. Pharaoh statues, like Amenhotep III for instance, didn't hide a thing. Chubby cheeks, puffed chest, a belly so prominent, if you touched it, you might hear "I'm full" echoing from the stone. No one retouched it. No one made the statue slim down on sandstone, because big bellies meant power. And power doesn't come in a size S. In major festivals like Opet, the king was paraded through the city with drums and incense, and people stared at his belly to predict the harvest. If the belly was big, crops would be good. If it looked a bit sunken, more chickens would be sacrificed than usual. Even in the Hebsed ritual, where the king had to run to prove his vigor, many pharaohs had someone run for them, while they transmitted energy remotely. To commoners, the pharaoh's belly was a live news ticker. "I saw the king's belly was pretty full yesterday. Guess we're not facing famine this year." Back in the previous dynasty, his belly shrank. You could tell that rain wasn't built to last. In a land where writing was sacred mystery, where monuments passed on generations, The pharaoh's belly was something anyone could read, even without literacy. But to keep the belly in divine standard shape, you needed a full kitchen army. Pharaoh ate like he was training for the afterlife entrance exam. His menu might include honey cakes glazed in goose fat, duck roasted with pomegranate sauce, beef liver brined in Nile salt, and thick barley beer, drunk instead of water, morning, noon, and night. Even royal children drank beer, not to party, but because river water had too many sacred bacteria. Pharaohs didn't have pizza, but they had date milk puddings, ancient ancestor of modern flan. No potato chips, but fried carob seeds coated in honey, crispy like the fate of your waistline. And so the belly grew, then grew more, and was called the belly of prosperity. Now back to the present. You're lying down listening to this at 2 a.m., your soft belly gently rising under your pajamas, and you just secretly ate a third piece of cake. Don't blame yourself. Don't tug your shirt down to hide your belly. You're not fat. You're just born in the wrong era. In Thebes 3,000 years ago, that belly of yours would have been carved in stone, blessed with incense at every festival, and looked at by hundreds of villagers just to feel reassured for harvest season. So, take a breath, relax, and close your eyes in peace, because the belly you're carrying was once considered a sign of an age smiled upon by Ra. If ancient Egypt ever had a period called the era of expanding prosperity, the man at its helm was none other than Amenhotep III, a king who reigned nearly 4 decades, without wars, without overthrows, only feasts and cake and belly. Amenhotep didn't eat just to live. He ate like it was a national duty, and history, sincerely, recorded it as a 40-year golden age of taste, a day of eating, scheduled by time and by belly breakfast, started with honey cake brushed with goose fat, aromatic before sunrise. Mid-morning, he'd be served wine-soaked dates, light on the belly, strong on the posture. Lunch was ceremonial, roast duck with pomegranate glaze, goat milk pudding, and harp music played to every chew. Afternoon, fig snacks glazed in honey. Evening brought aged grape wine, soft, sweet pastries. The event was called Stomach Closure Ceremony. And if anyone asked about a midnight snack on Friday, no one confirmed it. But the empty cake jar next morning spoke loud. Logistics behind a golden belly to keep Amenhotep's divine meal schedule. A full system operated behind the scenes. The baking team had someone fan the dough cool with lotus leaves. The meat team had a food priest who chanted over goose liver before roasting. The dessert team had an artisan who stirred pudding exactly 33 times, following the sun's orbit. And the server had to nod rhythmically each time the king swallowed, as if his throat were a sacred ritual needing cheer. Up to 50 people might contribute to one Amenhotep meal, each one essential, eating to rule and to negotiate. The king didn't just eat for himself, he ate as diplomacy. Foreign rulers sent offerings, from amber-soaked wine to rare blossom-stuffed honey cakes. A royal bite could seal an alliance. A rejected dish might stir border tension. Amenhotep once refused to marry a princess because her sweet pastry cracked in transit, and it was said, no one negotiated with a belly quite like he did. Trouble began when the royal physician gently suggested, Restraint. After year 30, the royal doctor took notice. The king snored before sleeping, breathed heavy after lunch, and once nearly sneezed into a cake. The advice was written in red ink. Cut honey, reduce pudding, maybe. Walk around the temple. Offered respectfully. Amenhotep read it, nodded, then kept eating. The next bite was even bigger, like a policy statement. Ra hasn't banned sugar. And when the king passed away, the coffin had to be resized. Death didn't shrink the belly's significance. Embalmers sighed at the sight of a full, round, and content-rich body. They used triple resin, longer linen wraps, and noted in the technical journal, Pharaoh case, type 3, requires extra salt and immense patience. His statues only show him seated, not because he never stood, but because stone wasn't wide enough to carve that belly to scale. The round legacy Amenhotep III left behind temples, statues, treaties, but deep in national memory, he also left a standard of abundance in the shape of a belly. Not all rule by war. Some rule by taste. And some require history to widen the coffin, just to fit in an era of greatness. If tonight you're breathing out, hand resting on a belly that feels rounder than Instagram standards, remember, someone once ate like you, lived gloriously like you, and was embalmed more thoroughly than you. Sleep well. Our round king sleeps deeply too, in a tomb wider than any waistline history ever dared to measure. If Amenhotep III thought that after death he would rest forever, he was wrong. 3,000 years later, he was taken for a health check, not for diagnosis, but so modern science could scan a divine belly with a CT machine. When modern doctors saw the consequences of ancient honey cakes, the people operating the scan that day, doctors, engineers, archaeologists, all had experience, but none had ever scanned. Someone once worshipped. When the image appeared on the screen, they fell silent. The linen layers, rib cage, missing teeth, and then calcified build-up around the aorta, fat deposits around the heart, and the belly. A belly still clearly visible after 3,000 years. A young doctor chuckled quietly. If he were alive, he'd have to take statins and quit pudding by year 10 of his reign. Someone else whispered, "Never seen someone eaten so gloriously." The king's fat, the people's sweat, comparison through light. The research team then scanned a few ordinary people, a farmer, a water carrier, unnamed individuals. The result, no fat, no calcification, no heart disease, but broken bones, worn teeth, and curved spines from labor. Hearts still functioned well up until death, because there wasn't much to clog them. One doctor concluded, one side lived fully, died gently, the other lived with less, but had a heart strong as a flood season river. Scanning a mummy like hosting a ceremony of light. Putting a mummy into the machine wasn't as simple as sliding luggage through airport security. Someone burned incense because, who knows, maybe he wasn't used to technology. Someone whispered, "With your permission, sir, we're just looking, won't touch a thing." And an engineer played instrumental music to ease the spirit. As the images appeared, every slice lit up clearly, spine, liver, stomach, a body that once ruled the world, now lying still under X-rays, quietly telling the price of sweets. At some point, he was no longer a mummy, but Mr. Amen. No one called him a specimen anymore. They called him Mr. Amen. Our old man, that's him, big belly, but looks kind. A nurse gently rewrapped his linen, whispering, "My mum told me, don't look at a mummy with scientific eyes, but with the heart of someone who once hugged a loved one." Before placing the body back in the wooden box, they printed a small diagnosis, not for official record, but to tuck into his chest. Heart, once beat for wine and praise. Liver, once held rich foods and royal secrets. Stomach, worked till the end, because it never got a break. Conclusion, a full life note, needs no treatment, just understanding. Let's say one bright day, somehow, Pharaoh Amenhotep III came back to life. Not in a mummy movie, not to scare TikTok, but simply to go in for a general health check. He walks into an international hospital, gets directed to the reception desk. Name, Amenhotep, son of the sun. Okay, last name Amen, first name Hotep. Have you had your 2 shots? Amenhotep III wears a hospital gown, sitting in the waiting room. Grumbling. In my day, we didn't wait this long. They brought goose liver straight to the throne. The doctor reads the results, then looks up. Your arteries, sir, are as thick as a temple wall inscription. I didn't live to detox. I lived to sign treaties with roast duck. Doctor's prescription, cut down on pudding, walk more, around the pyramid is fine. Stop eating after 9 p.m. if possible. Recheck. In 3,000 years, a man who once lived grew fat and was loved. Amenhotep III, under the cold light of the CT scan, didn't appear as a god, but as an ordinary man. Not every pharaoh had a belly big enough to warrant an extra wide coffin. Not every king ruled with a 6-course meal and 4 synchronized nods per swallow. Egyptian history, though filled with stone statues, honey cakes, and perfumed oils, also had kings who were lean, dry, and sometimes more dangerous than all the round bellies combined. The warrior king ate little, fought a lot. Take Thutmose III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, a man who spent more time on campaigns than at banquets. In over 17 military expeditions, he didn't bring a chef, but did bring a bridge engineer and a battlefield journal keeper. Bas-reliefs of Thutmose don't show him eating cake. They show him trampling enemies, bow in hand, eyes staring into the distance like he's appraising real estate in Syria. They said his belly never had time to grow, because he never stays still more than 3 days. If Amenhotep III was full belly, peaceful kingdom, then Thutmose was flat stomach, enemies beware. Akhenaten, the eccentric king who dined on philosophy. Then came Akhenaten, the mysterious pharaoh with a strange body, long, curved, uneven, and very unlike previous statues. Some say he had a pituitary issue. Others say he simply ate little and lived spiritually. Akhenaten didn't build temples for feasting. He built a city to worship light. He didn't eat much meat, didn't drink hard liquor, and quite possibly was the first king on a clean-eating, meditative sleep, monotheistic god regimen. If Amenhotep was the king of the belly, then Akhenaten was the king of the high forehead and minimalist lunch. History looks at him with curiosity, like someone eyeing a vegan at a BBQ. Ah, you good? The kings who weren't fat because there was nothing left to eat. And then there were the pharaohs of the later dynasties, like those at the end of the New Kingdom, early Greco-Roman period, who weren't fat, weren't full, and no longer had the power to order more cake. The economy declined, crops failed, taxes rose. Even the king had to eat bread made from old barley flour and drink watery Nile beer. A Greek historian once lightly mocked a late-period pharaoh. He looked more like a temple cashier than a living god. No belly, no glory, and no one carved statues of them because it wasn't worth the stone. And what history quietly reminds you, having no belly doesn't mean weakness. Having a belly doesn't guarantee strength. Thutmose used swords, not spoons. Akhenaten used ideas, not duck legs. Some others used nothing at all, and that too was a form of kingship. History doesn't choose people by waist size. History simply remembers those who had flavor. Not every pain is ordinary. Some pains get carved into history, and one of them is the pain coming from the right big toe of Amenhotep III. The first night of the rebellious foot, it was a full moon night. The feast was at its peak. Glistening wine, soft honey cakes, roast duck stacked into a tower. Pharaoh laughed while eating, blessing the guests while preparing to rise and deliver the final speech of the banquet. Then he paused, one hand gripping the throne, his face slightly tense, his big toe tapping to the beat of the drums. Only the drum was inflammation pulses. A priest rushed in, diagnosed through the foot, then exclaimed, "God Sobek has warned. You ate too much goose liver last week." The party went silent. A silver chopstick fell to the stone floor, as if keeping rhythm for a historic pain. A day living with royal gout. The next morning, the entire palace was ordered not to ring bells, only to whisper. Pharaoh did not rise from bed. He was lifted by two people, one supporting the shoulders, one holding the leg, and another assigned to blow gentle wind onto his forehead to keep him calm. Breakfast was suggested to be lotus root porridge and sugarless bread. Pharaoh nodded, then glanced at the nearby tray, which had sweet cakes for decoration, and quietly ate them all. "I eat for the sake of aesthetics," he said, as his toe began to throb. During the morning council, the king did not stand to receive his ministers. He sat back straight, feet propped on two cushions, head slightly tilted, as if meditating on geopolitics. A minister whispered, "Will His Majesty go to the temple to offer incense today?" Pharaoh replied, without changing expression, "The gods are everywhere. I kneel with my soul." That afternoon, at the Amun temple ritual, he could not kneel. A special chair was made overnight, the back shaped like a crescent moon, with the inscription, "Sit, for you have stood long enough in history." When medicine gave up, art and ritual spoke instead. That very night, an emergency medical council was held. The royal physician sighed, joints swollen, pulse hot, and knees refused to serve the ceremony. One suggested a mud wrap, another proposed chanting spells. The youngest doctor, fresh graduate from New Kingdom Orthopedics, quietly wrote, "Gout, disease of emperors with full stomachs." After 3 hours of debate and one failed trial using lotus petal compress, a final solution was agreed upon. Do not call it illness. Do not require the king to kneel. Do not let anyone ask, why is the king sitting? Because from now on, the king meditates in divine stillness. When gout became a national posture movement, news of the king sitting instead of kneeling spread across Egypt like word of a new river found. People began asking each other, if the king doesn't kneel, should we? In the Memphis marketplace, a group of potters invented a new pose, half kneel of the soul, one knee bent, one leg forward, eyes closed, muttering, his knee aches, but my heart stays warm. New statues of the king were now sculpted in a position, knees turned, one arm resting, gaze distant, with caption, still offering prayers, just not in the old way. Poets began writing, he does not bow, yet his eyes are lower than the moon. He does not kneel, yet the mortal world calls him sacred. An old woman told her grandchild, in the past, not kneeling was blasphemy. But ever since the king's foot swelled, we learned how to bow, in the heart. Not everyone who kneels is the most reverent that night. Pharaoh slept on his side, feet propped up. Outside the palace, people still held rituals, but in new, gentler poses. And in the unofficial epic, a line was passed down. He did not need to bow, for everyone had already bowed in his place with understanding. Hunting season, the time to show off. In ancient Egypt, hunting season was the time for pharaohs to show off, like action movie heroes starring in their own film. Not hunting to survive, hunting to be immortalized in sculpture. To go hunting meant riding a horse, holding a bow, shouting like the god of thunder, chasing wild beasts, charging forward like a storm, returning with a lion's head hanging from the front of the chariot. And if you didn't catch anything, no problem. The artist would carve it like you had slain 3 of them at once. But that year, there was one small problem. Pharaoh couldn't stand up. Amenhotep III's right big toe, still swollen from last month's honey cake binge, meant he couldn't mount a horse, couldn't draw a bow, and most importantly, couldn't catch anything that had legs. A hunting trip, non-mobile edition, to preserve the image of the king of strength. He summoned advisors for an emergency meeting. One proposal passed. We will hunt, but hunt statically. His Majesty doesn't need to move. He will sit on a palanquin, and others will hunt around him. Thus began the first stationary hunting expedition in Egyptian history. He was seated on a silk-wrapped hunting throne, lined with 3 layers of cushions, shaded with soft palm canopy. The seat was angled to make him look like he was standing, when really he was elevating his foot. At his side, one man holding the spear, one man holding the umbrella, one man holding a jar of joint oil for use in case battle spirit unexpectedly tightens the knee. Scene, the legendary throw. A lion appeared, or at least was guided to show up. The signal was given. Prepare the propaganda. The spear holder handed the weapon to the king, whispering, "We've aligned the angle. You just toss gently." He threw. The spear flew. It spun. It landed in a bush. The lion let out a soft roar, then fell. Maybe because someone behind it had just shot an arrow right into the heart. The whole entourage roared. Victory for His Majesty. He didn't hunt with strength, but with sheer aura. He slayed with a glance. Pharaoh, breathing heavily, replied, "Thank you. I hunted with belief. Statues, paintings, reliefs, angled to look like standing. A few days later, the reliefs were carved, the spear extended to over 30 feet long, the prey larger than in real life, but conveniently placed under the tip of the spear. The king, still seated, but sculpted to look like. He had just landed mid-strike. The caption beneath, "The king who does not move, yet causes all things to stop." Public reaction, sitting hunter, becomes a way of life news of this unusual hunting trip spread to the markets. The people were amazed, then touched. A group of elderly nobles in Thebes held a simulated hunt at home. They sat on cushion chairs in their backyards. Kids ran around pretending to be wild animals. Each time a noble raised a hand. "Ah," he looked at me, "I'm dead." An old lady selling vegetables at the market declared, "I'm old now, can't walk much, but ever since the king hunted by, sitting, I feel like I still have value. I can still look and things fall." Update to royal training curriculum. Inside the palace, scholars met and decided, remove the chapter Chasing Lions Barefoot, add a new chapter, Seated Presence, Stillness Without Weakness. Teach how to place a swollen foot so it still radiates authority. A young student asked, "If I have joint pain one day, can I also go hunting without going?" The master nodded. "As long as you sit at the right angle, they'll all think you're holding a sword." The great hunt on a sword joint that night. Pharaoh returned, belly full, foot swollen, but heart light. He gazed at the temple ceiling, where the hunt had been immortalized, and smiled. History is written by those who sit and adjusted by those who position the pose. He fell asleep, hugging a knee pillow, and dreamed of a lion coming close, then lying down gently, just to say, "Thanks for sparing me," or "Thanks to whoever you had do it." You don't have to run. You don't have to throw a spear. You don't even have to stand up. With enough belief, a soft cushion, and a few skilled friends, you can absolutely go on a successful hunt from the middle of your seat. The kitchen, where power was roasted every morning. If you ever thought that being king was the most powerful role in Egypt, you clearly never stepped into the west wing of the Malkata Palace, where the royal kitchen stood, and where everything could cause indigestion. Here, people didn't cook. They sacrificed ingredients through artistry. A regular shift included 12 bakers, each kneading dough according to the lunar cycle. 6 firekeepers, rotating shifts by the hour of Ra's sunrise. 3 incense priests, whose job was to sniff pots and exhale blessings. And 1 note-taker recording the king's facial expression whenever he finished a dish without nodding. Every dish offered had to pass 3 steps. 1. Reciting the "May it digest well" blessing. 2. Cross-checking the list of dishes that once made His Majesty sigh. 3. Poison testing by a servant who signed a survival pledge the day before. No one ever died from food. But 1 was reassigned to pillow dusting duties because the lotus root soup was slightly lacking in joy. Dishes banned for being too memorable. Not every dish was a success. Some were erased from history, others were carved into stone, so they'd never be made again. River fish liver in black tamarind sauce made the king hiccup for 3 hours straight. Date cake with fermented cheese filling smelled like culinary betrayal. Star anise lotus root soup caused the royal intestines to weep in silence, as per the chief physician. Lamb shank in black grape honey glaze, described as so delicious, the knees declared a strike. Every dish had a backstory, and someone demoted. All were recorded in the National Dietary Scroll, stored in the wooden cabinet next to the throne room. The Feast of Silence, the Sacred Quietude Festival. After many nights of clutching his belly and doubting the god Sobek, Pharaoh issued a decree: we must hold a feast where we barely eat. Thus, the Sacred Quietude Festival was born, the first feast in Egyptian history where people came to eat by not eating. Festival rules: no meat, no frying, no mysterious filled pastries. Each guest received only one spoon, without a bowl. Sit at a distance of 1 arm's reach, plus 1 moment of silence. Menu: warm lotus tea, thin rice porridge, watery like the Nile at season's end, a slice of lotus root wrapped in fragrant leaf, and dessert was sweet memory, improvised by each guest. Pharaoh sat in the center, no throne, no cushion, no meat. He ate a spoon of porridge, closed his eyes. The whole temple fell silent. One priest exhaled. He has reached symbolic fullness. An old minister teared up. This porridge is so bland. It brought back my childhood. An unsent letter from the internal organs to the king. If there ever was a letter written in blood vessels, it would be from the stomach, liver, intestines, and other night shift colleagues, addressed to the king. Your Majesty, we have loyally served you at every banquet, even when you ordered more while we hadn't finished digesting the previous round. But lately, we feel tired. We don't ask you to skip dishes. We only ask that you eat slower, so we don't have to call emergency meetings at midnight. If you care for us, please breathe gently after each spoon of pudding. Respectfully, the internal team, living in you, hurting for you. He never got to read it. But after that festival, he sat alone, holding a cup of hot tea, whispering, "Today, I didn't hear my stomach speak, and that is a good thing." Eating to live, not to build a pyramid in the stomach. Amenhotep III once ate as if every meal was a national ritual, every dish a peace treaty, every chew a divine victory. But one day, he suddenly understood. History didn't need to be engraved on goose liver. History could also be carved through simple meals, and a belly that knew how to forgive. Temperance isn't about eating less. It's about eating at the right time, with the right people, and stopping when your organs start sending anonymous letters. A secret meeting before the embalming, when the priests had to call for reinforcements. After Pharaoh Amenhotep III passed away, the news spread across temples and priestly halls. But the most anxious of all weren't the priests, nor the queen, but the embalming team. They looked at each other, then looked down at the royal nutrition records. 40 years of reign, 3,000 banquets, 1 dedicated relief sculpture of the belly. An embalmer exhaled, "We need an emergency meeting." The next morning, in a room adjacent to the Temple of Anubis, the meeting commenced with the attendance of the chief embalmer, 2 stoneworkers specializing in coffin-size adjustments, 1 priest fluent in obscure rites, and 1 apprentice holding the embalming manual with trembling hands This is the largest body we've ever worked on. No mistakes allowed. And the belly must not spill out of the wrappings. The fat-drawing salt phase, and when the salt wanted to quit. According to ritual, the body would be covered in natron salt to extract all moisture and fluids. But with this king, we're not embalming a body, we're preserving a culinary empire. 120 kilos of salt wasn't enough. They had to use 180 kilo and still felt the belly defied physics. An embalmer sighed as the salt began to dissolve slowly. I can smell his 17th royal wedding feast. Every morning, the chief would press a finger into the belly. If the finger sank too deep, more salt. If it bounced back, re-pray. If it came back greasy, early lunch break. The problem with linen, slippery terrain ahead. After the drying phase, the team began wrapping, a task that seemed simple, until the first linen layer slid off the belly within 10 seconds. This isn't embalming, this is wrapping a tet cake. They had to change technique, diagonal wrap instead of straight, layered with fragrant flowers so the linen would cling to the scent of trust. 2 people holding, 1 pulling, 1 hugging the belly for leverage, an extra 100 meters of linen. Final note embroidered on the last fold. This is the 86th wrap. Dear gods, please understand, we are not lazy. His belly is simply vast. The coffin incident, lid won't close, because the belly refuses to bow on the day of entombment. With incense in the air, the body was gently laid inside, joints aligned, everything at peace, until the lid didn't fit, not flush, not even, not remotely logical. The stoneworker wiped his brow. The belly seems to want one more farewell, another emergency meeting. The solution: extend the belly space of the coffin by a thumb's width. An inscription was added along the stone edge. This space was opened not due to error, but for one who lived fully. No need to fit the coffin, just need to fit life. When the lid was finally shut, this time snug, forgiving, the entire embalming crew stood still, breathing deep like after climbing temple stairs. An old embalmer, hands still covered in linen threads, whispered, "He lived so fully, even the coffin had to make room." That, too, is a legacy. Not everyone needs to be thin to be remembered. Not everyone has to fit the mold to enter eternity. Amenhotep left behind temples, statues, and a coffin that was expanded for him. They don't tell the story of how he died. They tell this: to the very end, he lived, large enough to make the lid step back. Have you ever seen an Egyptian mummy? Small, thin, hollow eyes, flat belly, limbs delicate like they survived on raw salad their whole life. Trust me, no, they once lived full, very full, so full the coffin had to be widened just to close properly. Ancient Body Sculpting Association. The secret of those who knew how to reshape history. In the world of ancient Egyptian embalming, there was an unofficial side job: post-mortem shape optimization for the afterlife. Their task? Not just to keep the body from rotting, but to ensure the body looked divine. Their techniques included tight cross-wrapping to create an imagined waistline, charm, stuffing fragrant mud, lotus leaves, and scraps of linen where needed, popping joints, stretching arms, folding knees for a cleaner silhouette. One embalmer wrote, "We don't fabricate, we simply retell the body in a form more likely to be worshipped. Some mummies even had muscles painted onto the linen, so they'd look like they just finished lifting with God Seth. Paintings, statues, and post-death beauty standards. Once the body was reshaped, it was the artist's turn, with hammers, paintbrushes, and a heart gently tolerant of reality. Pharaoh statues, square shoulders, flat belly, lean thighs, serious face, waist untouched by goose liver. Mural artists followed standard protocol: side profile, long stride, walking stick in hand, divine aura like a man striding into memory. No double chin, no cake, no belly. One stone carver sighed. We don't slim him out because we hate him. We slim him because people will honor him more if his belly doesn't block his feet. And thus, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who once made his coffin burst at the belly, became the model of divinely slender in every relief. When modern science opened the coffin and gasped 3,000 years later, a team of modern archaeologists opened the coffin. Outside, the image of a sculpted king, broad shoulders, flat stomach, divine symmetry. Inside, a mummy, fuller than expected, thick thighs, round shoulders, the belly still slightly bulging, even after a century's worth of natron salt. One researcher muttered, "He's like a passport photo taken by a wide-angle lens in real life." A fifth canopic jar was found, holding just a liver, with the carving, supplementary, for he required extra room. Beneath the body, a cloth bore the message: "If the people of the future find me, do not blame me for excess. Remember, I once lived fully enough to lack nothing." The holy fit body, an afterlife pressure too to enter the Duat afterlife. The soul must be light as a feather, slim as river reed, and appear not fat. Goddess Ma'at, the goddess of truth, doesn't judge your belly, but mortals do. One embalmer once wrote, "No one says he was fat at the funeral, but, we were told, make sure outsiders only see what's worth remembering." Statues, murals, tomb portraits, all slim just a little. No deception, just gracious shaping. A mummy whispers, "If I'm smaller, it's to help you remember me better." If you're standing in a museum, looking at me, and say, "He looks so thin," then know this: I wasn't always like that. I once ate plenty, lived joyfully, ordered sides after dessert, slept upright from bloating, and was loved, with a belly full of laughter. I didn't shrink to deceive. I shrank so that you, the living, could remember me in a shape that's easier to admire. I once lived abundantly. Now, I lie here compact, not because I've changed, but because I left the fullness to memory. A royal funeral in ancient Egypt was a national event, but for Pharaoh Amenhotep III, a man who lived enough to make his coffin wider, this was also a 70-day feast. A state funeral, complete with menu. According to tradition, the dead still needed to be offered food, not in symbolic spirituality, but with real fat, real meat, real pastries. Menu for day 9. 3 goose thighs marinated in pomegranate, 6 pies filled with beef fat and purple onions, 1 pot of lotus porridge with essence of eternal rest, 2 jars of strong barley beer, enough for his soul to walk onward without stumbling. A servant whispered, "Can he still eat?" The royal chef replied, "He may not eat, but his belly is still here, and we respect that." Offered dishes weren't diet friendly. No vegetables, no detox teas, no concept of low sugar. A student asked the priest, "Why not serve something light?" The priest replied, "If he once lived full, then even in death, he should feel the fullness." A line from the chef's diary. "Today I cooked for 3 people, but to send off 1. Goat thigh roast etched with his name using a sweet knife. Date pudding soaked in honey for 3 nights. Meals not meant for digestion, but remembrance." The temple ritual of food. Offering. When priests bowed before a roasted thigh. Inside the small temple on the western side of Thebes, where light entered only through a narrow slit in the roof, food offerings were presented each morning during the 70-day embalming. The high priest, wearing a tall linen hat and holding incense bundles, entered first. Behind him, attendants, 1 carrying bread, 1 holding wine, 1 carefully holding a warm bowl of reheated goose. They did not walk fast. No one spoke. Every step was soft, as if treading upon gratitude. Upon reaching the statue of Amenhotep, they knelt, not because he was king, but because he was a man who had lived with great taste. The high priest recited each dish aloud. "This is lotus bread, soaked 3 nights per his habit. This is roasted thigh, carved and glazed with pomegranate as he instructed. This is the porridge, ladled from an uncovered pot, so he could catch the scent early." They arranged the dishes in a crescent before the statue. At the center, a single slice of fat cake, round, crispy, fragrant enough that the whole room seemed to sigh in unison. The plate as memory, ritual. Every offering had a minor ritual alongside it, not just placing, but reenacting each old habit. When pouring honey on the cake, an attendant whispered, he liked it heavy. When covering the porridge pot, the tray bearer deliberately left 1 corner open, so he can smell it again. They weren't performing. They weren't crying. They simply acted as though he was still behind the curtain, as if his voice might rise at any moment. "1 more bite. My belly remembers yesterday." Offering food like offering a whole life. The ritual didn't end with gongs, no drums, no spiritual spectacle. Only morning light filtering through the temple roof, falling exactly on the sweet cake plate, warmed by incense, and 1 old priest exhaling. He no longer eats, but the food still knows the way home. The final flavor. When a soul smells its favorite dish before entering Duat, they say, when a person dies, they no longer eat, they only smell. And for Amenhotep III, who once ate 3 full meals a day, just smelling was a way to say goodbye. On day 40, a plate of honey-fried cake was placed beside the statue's head. Next to it, a bowl of lotus porridge and a small pot of goose broth, simmered until longing. Wind from the river drifted in. The cake's aroma slipped into the linen wrappings. A servant whispered, "If you're still here, please smell this one last time." No one saw a soul, but 1 priest said, "When the porridge scent spread, I felt the incense in the room hesitate for a beat." An old chef dreamed of Amenhotep that night. He said nothing, just leaned down, inhaled deeply, then nodded. When the living eat on behalf of the dead, and food becomes a prayer. Ancient custom says, after an offering is made, if the soul doesn't finish the meal, the living may eat it in reverence, not from hunger, not from waste, but because eating in their place is a form of worship. Someone held a cake with both hands, thinking, he once loved this dish. Now, let me remember it for him. Someone bit into the goose thigh, tears falling, unsure whether from fat or memory. Someone else held a bowl of porridge, whispering, he used to say, eat slowly, it's hot. Now, I truly eat slow. No one finished their food, no one clinked cups. Only one last piece remained, left in the dish, like a permanent refusal. The final bite isn't to swallow, but to hold onto a life once fully lived. A funeral isn't a morning feast. It's a meal for sharing memories. The dead no longer need to eat, but the living need to cook, to plate, to remember exactly the scent of someone who once ordered seconds during a national council. No one said goodbye, just an empty plate, an upside-down spoon, and the lingering scent still curling around the statue. If you've ever regretted a meal you didn't get to share with someone, if you've ever bitten into something and thought of someone who's gone, know this. In ancient Egypt, that was once called worship. Don't let the monument fool you. Ramses III, the one praised as the last father of the empire, did not die in battle, nor from plague. He died in a silent palace plot that may very well have started in the kitchen. The final dish wasn't a cake. It was a trap according to official records. Ramses III was assassinated in a court conspiracy, led by a secondary queen and a group of close officials. They aimed to place her son on the throne. But there's one detail few ever mention. Before Ramses III was slit at the said festival, he had just eaten a lavish dinner. A side note from the palace chef reads, that night, he asked for hollow fried pastries, but was served the meat-filled kind. He frowned, but ate it anyway. And that may have been the moment when power slipped away from the center of a pastry. Ramses's kitchen, where the soup bubbled with rumors before any dynasty falls. There is always a pot of soup that was cooked wrong. Inside Ramses III's royal kitchen, where over 80 dishes were prepared daily, every stirred spoon stirred a rumor. What's on the menu tonight? Roast goose. Second queen just sent in a jar of strange honey this morning. Who's testing it? No one. The taste tester, called in sick. A knife washer overheard. Last night, anyone see the visitor walk into the spice vault? An onion peeler whispered, the meat's a bit tough today, kind of like the Queen's stare at the throne yesterday. Kitchens were places where no one spoke loudly, but everyone knew everything. They knew when a dish was requested just to test someone's loyalty. They knew when a priest suddenly went vegetarian. It meant don't get involved. They knew when Ramses asked for extra honey. It meant he was bracing for a tough meeting. And they knew that night when the strange filled pastry was served. And Ramses III frowned but didn't refuse. The kitchen had seen the first sign of the end. An old sous chef looked at the steaming porridge pot and quietly said, the fire's strange tonight. Maybe it's not the food. The hand towel and a warning missed that night. Ramses's final dinner was served as usual. Golden oil lamps, shining plates, aromatic wine, and, as always, a small hand towel neatly folded to the left. Only that night, the towel was folded crooked. According to court etiquette, the pharaoh's hand towel was always folded into a lotus shape, symbol of purity, authority, and unquestioned fragrance. But that night, it was folded into a rough square, like a reminder someone was in a hurry or trying to send a signal. The towel folder's name was Beck. He had served Ramses for over 12 years. He knew every fold was a message. Beck folded it wrong, on purpose. If someone else sees it, they'll think it's a mistake. But if it's him, he'll recognize something's off in the linen. As he placed the towel on the tray, Beck glanced at Ramses. The king saw the towel, paused 1 second, then wiped his hands like always. No questions, no frown, no skipping the meal. Beck stepped back, hands trembling, not from fear, but because he knew that might have been the last time he could gently warn someone he once believed was immortal. The mummy trial, the chef's testimony. Weeks after Ramses III's death, a court was convened in suspicious silence. No gongs, no drums, no mourning wails, only paper, wax seals, and bowed heads. The case title in the record: The Internal Palace Conspiracy Concerning the Body of the One. Among a long list of suspects, the vizier, the priest, the secondary queen, one stood out unexpectedly: the royal chef. His name was Hori. He had cooked for Ramses from the days when the king was lean, until the time he had to sit on a throne to eat. When brought before the judge, Hori did not tremble. He simply stood, hands still marked with grease burns from an unfinished roast on funeral night. The examiner asked, "Did you add a foreign ingredient to the final dish?" Hori replied, "No." Then after a pause, added, "But I didn't dare taste that dish, because no one told me to." Hori explained. That night, he was given the stuffed pastry order, a simple dish. But it came, sealed with a royal stamp from inside the palace. He asked, "No tasting required?" The messenger shook his head. "Her Majesty says, not necessary." He didn't dare object, but his hands trembled. As he served it, he whispered, "If something's wrong, please don't finish it." Ramses ate half, and that was the last time Hori saw him. With eyes that held no blame, just the gaze of a man who had seen a future with no appetite. Hori wasn't condemned, he wasn't cleared, he was simply transferred. No one remembers where he went. Only one line was carved on the back of the royal kitchen's clay urn. He once cooked for a king who died starving, surrounded by full plates. When Ramses III died, people didn't just wrap him in linen, didn't just offer food, didn't just whisper, "Go in peace," into his embalmed ear. They also called the sculptor, not to commemorate, but to optimize his body. The pharaoh statue, a carving that rebalanced history by royal order. Ramses III's statue was to be placed at the intersection of the great temple of Karnak, where thousands of people would pass by each month. The statue was to be 6 meters tall. It had to convey authority, divine slimness, and the quiet grace of a scandal-free king. The sculptor's name was Kanu. An old man, quiet, and he deeply hated custom edits. When the initial sketch was submitted, it came with explicit notes. Please trim the belly, broaden the shoulders, slim the arms, and if possible, remove all signs of gout. Kanu looked at the paper, said nothing, just exhaled, like blowing dust off a memory he once wished to preserve. The first statue was rejected for being too real. Kanu, the old sculptor, began carving on the 15th day after the funeral. He wasn't in a rush. No horns, no drums, just hands gripping a chisel, heart still remembering the scent of lotus porridge from the funeral. He didn't use the official sketch. He didn't measure by divine body standards. He simply carved Ramses the way he last saw him, breathing and still asking for more cake. The statue stood, chest slightly sunken, shoulders leaning, belly round and even, carved with a faint crack like a slow breath. Someone from the palace came to view it, looked down and held his breath. "You call this belly divine?" Kanu tapped the stone. "I don't carve gods, I carve people." The official flipped through the directive manual, muttering, "It has to be slim, serene, and most importantly, it must not remind anyone of gout." The statue was criticized, covered with cloth, ordered to be revised or replaced. Kanu stayed silent. If his belly must shrink to fit someone else's memory, then this statue doesn't need to stand long. The sculptor had to choose between truth and a paycheck. 3 days after the statue was covered, Kanu was summoned to the Grand Temple, not for interrogation, but to be invited to collaborate in the spirit of improvement. "You may keep the frame, but please make his belly less accurate." Kanu looked at the updated carving instructions. Shoulders must be square, arms 1 knuckle longer, waist pulled in by 1 fist. Belly, if it must exist, should be sculpted as divine breath holding. In exchange, he would receive 20 sacks of young grain, a plot of land near the river, and permission to sign his name on the statue's base, but on the back. He went home, that night, alone in his workshop. Kanu looked at the new slab of stone and whispered, "If I sculpt the truth, the statue might not stand. But if I trim, my memory won't stay still." He carved, lighter, shallower, neater. But when he reached the belly, he paused. After a long while, he exhaled and carved into the back of the statue a very small line. "This is not his body. This is the body others wish to remember." The statue was erected, but Kanu never carved again. The statue was raised. Passers-by praised, "Our king was truly slim." Kanu never sculpted again. Sometimes he drank alone, rested a hand on his own belly, and said, "This part doesn't need reshaping." The final engraving hidden behind the statue's heel. The final statue of Ramses III was erected exactly as instructed. Right hand holding a scepter, left hand clutching a lucky charm, square shoulders, slim waist, a calm face, as if no queen had ever sabotaged his dinner. People walked past. Children looked up, pointed. "Dad, our king is really tall." Dad replied, "Tall and not even fat. Amazing." No one knew that behind the statue, on the right heel, where only soil and moss clung, there was a tiny inscription, very small, unreadable by eye, only felt or guessed. The one who carved it was Kanu. Just before the statue was raised, he engraved a line, deep enough to remain, faint enough to be forgotten. If someone asks, "Why doesn't he look like the statue?" then answer, "Because memory isn't wide enough for a truthful belly." When he finished carving, the sky hadn't yet brightened. Birds hadn't sung. Dust still rested on the statue's crown. He sat down, leaned against the stone leg and quietly said, "I didn't rebuild him with truth, but I left a mark so that someone patient enough might find the belly that was carved away." Kanu died a few years later, left no children and no more statues. Only a whispered saying among stonemasons remained: "If you want to know the king's true shape, don't look at his face. Kneel, look at his heel." For over 300 years, the scale of the goddess Ma'at had worked just fine. One side held the heart of the deceased, the other a feather of truth. The scale never spoke, but it didn't have to. It only had to tilt, and lately, it's been leaning to the left more than usual. When the scale had an opinion, but no one dared to listen, a group of priests at the temple of Abydos began recording the phenomenon. 9 out of 10 souls tilt the scale to the left, including 4 who used to be chefs. 1 replaced the feather, 1 checked the stone weight. Someone whispered, "Maybe the heart is heavier, not from sin, but because the organs haven't digested yet." An old man wiping the scale muttered, "The scale never lies. It's just not used to a 4-course meal before death." The sacrificial camel refused to enter the temple. It happened in the 6th month of Pharaoh Ramos II's reign, when the temple of Anubis at Saqqara was preparing for the grand fat offering. Everything was perfect. Cakes fried exactly 3 hours prior. Wild honey from the southern border. Lotus porridge reheated 5 times. A white camel to carry the offerings into the sanctuary. Except for one detail. The camel refused to enter the temple. The handler recalled, "I pulled. It stood still. I coaxed. It chewed a piece of cake, then turned away." Another whispered, "I looked in its eyes. They seemed to say, 'You're bringing that in here.' Isn't that an insult to the gods?" An old priest frowned. "I've seen goats refuse the altar because the cake was too oily. But a camel, this is a first." After the incident, the priest held a closed meeting. Someone said Anubis didn't respond, didn't accept the offering. There was no fragrance flowing through the temple like usual. A new apprentice whispered, "If we offer a cake, and neither god nor camel wants it, maybe this dish is no longer sacred." When scented oil couldn't erase a culinary past. After the camel's refusal, the priest decided to cleanse the entire temple with the sweetest oil from the Elephantine region. Candles lit. Oil evaporated. Incense danced around the god statue like a forgiveness ritual. And then, someone entered the central sanctuary, where the mummy of Prince Thutmosis rested, once famous for finishing 3 banquet tables at his son's wedding. A statue cleaner froze. There's a smell, not incense, not resin, more like cold goose thigh with cumin. An assistant murmured, "The oil can't mask it. Seems like the memory of his last meal still lingers here." And so, from that day on, they changed strategy. No more incense, no more sacred smoke, no more oil sprinkling, just open the doors, let the wind pass through, let the scent drift, if it wanted to. An old priest said, "Some bodies don't need perfuming. They just need to be left alone, because that smell isn't fat. It's what they once lived too deeply." When the shroud no longer fit, and temple tailors complained to the heavens, the shroud weaving guild at Saqqara had worked for 11 generations never complained until the final Amenhotep, whose body exceeded all standard sizes. A tailor wrote in his journal, "I've sewn for women 4 months pregnant, but never had to extend cloth around the middle of a king." A standard burial shroud was 6.5 cubits long, just enough to wrap the body from foot to brow in 3.5 turns. Amenhotep required 4.5, plus an extra patch for the right shoulder due to slight swelling during embalming. A young tailor asked, "Can we skip the shoulder?" The master shook his head. "No, shoulders carry a life. They must be covered." On the final night of stitching, the entire team stretched the cloth by hand. No one dared use scissors, not from lack of tools, but because they could hear the threads groan with each tug. A tailor whispered, "Every time the needle touches the cloth, it feels like I'm stitching memory." One part he never wanted hidden, yet we must wrap it to match someone else's memory. And so, the final shroud was extended with 3 extra strips. One excess flap tucked discreetly behind the back. No label, no annotation. Just a different thread color, for only the sharpest eye to catch the fabric's kindness towards someone who had lived too much. Leaning left isn't sin. It's just too many marks left behind. The scale leans. The camel turns back. The oil surrenders. The cloth stretches. Not because someone failed, not because someone disrespected, just because the dead had once lived too deeply, too oily, too round. So when you see the scale tip slightly, don't think it's guilt. Maybe it's just the echo of a final meal they didn't get to say thank you for because they were still chewing. Sleep well. Don't stress about your waistline after dinner. The goddess Maat will understand, as long as your heart hides nothing beneath the fat. No one came to the temple that day. No incense, no drums, no ceremony, just an old mummy lying on a stone slab. No one touched it. No one tried to fix anything anymore. The shroud had yellowed, the linen no longer white, and the belly still slightly bulged, just as it was on the day it was wrapped by hand. Some mummies find peace because no one's trying to slim them anymore. Time softens everything, even the obsession with form, even the fear of being remembered wrong. They once reshaped statues, stitched extra cloth, poured incense on bloated bellies. But at some point, everyone got tired, not out of disrespect, but because they had learned that leaving it be was also a form of reverence. A young student passed by, stopped, didn't bow, didn't take notes, just looked, and smiled. He wasn't small, but he was real. Asleep unshaped. No one came to adjust his pose. No one stood by to catch the light just right. No incense burned to mask old smells. No whispers urging him to slim back into belief. The dead, finally, got to lie the way they once lived. One arm curled from joint pain on that side. Belly leaned slightly left, out of habit from sleeping on his wife's pillow. Cracks around the eyes, left untouched. Linen wrapped unevenly because the tailor had cried while working. No one corrected anything. No one said, "This isn't regulation." The memory of a man who wasn't small, but was enough. They didn't carve his statue, didn't build a big temple. His name isn't in the libraries, But in the handwritten notes of a gravekeeper, there's one line. He once gave me part of his bread when I forgot to eat while burying my father. No one transcribed that into history books, but it was enough for a soul to be remembered. If you've ever feared you lived too fully, please think of him. Have you ever feared being judged for your body? Ever felt you had to shrink to fit someone else's memory? Ever wished you'd eaten less to be loved more? Then please think of this man, whose body still didn't fit the cloth, but whom everyone eventually chose to leave untouched, not because he had no flaws, but because he had lived enough to no longer need trimming. The deadly curse of the Egyptian pharaohs. You might think the pharaoh's curse began with a bloody ritual, or a mysterious inscription carved deep inside a tomb, hidden beneath a giant jackal-headed statue, or at the very least, a whispered incantation drifting in the wind. No, it began with a tent, a British nobleman, and a very irresponsible Egyptian mosquito. Lord Carnarvon, the man who got bitten and became legend. George Edward Stanhope Molyneux. Herbert, also known as Lord Carnarvon, wasn't an archaeologist. He was a British aristocrat, a race car enthusiast, and rich enough to fund other people to dig in the sand for mummies. He had once nearly died in a car crash in Germany, so he switched from racing to tomb hunting. A safer hobby, theoretically. Then, in 1922, he funded a man named Howard Carter, who had spent the previous 7 years digging up nothing but rocks and disappointment, until one day in November, when Carter tapped on a patch of earth and discovered what centuries had long sought, a nearly intact tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Yes, wonderful things. That was Carter's legendary line when he shone a light through the first small hole opened in the stone. Behind it, gold, gleaming gold, artifacts untouched, and deep inside, a mummy still perfectly preserved. To the archaeological world, it was a priceless treasure. To Lord Carnarvon, it was the best investment of the century. No one knew that. Less than 4 months later, he would become the first to be cursed. A small bite, a big story. In March 1923, Lord Carnarvon was shaving in his hotel in Cairo when he accidentally cut open a mosquito bite on his left cheek. A very ordinary event if you were in London and hadn't just disturbed the 3,000-year resting place of an ancient king. Less than 2 weeks later, the wound got infected. High fever, septicemia, kidney failure. On April 5th, 1923, Lord Carnarvon died. Age, 56. Cause of death, infection complications. Cause believed worldwide. An angry pharaoh. Lights out, dog howls, and a curse begins before Carnarvon's death certificate was even printed. Rumours spread faster. The London Times headlined, "The Curse of the Pharaoh Claims First Life." Daily Express, "Lord Carnarvon Dies, Egypt in Darkness." They said, at the exact moment he died, the entire city of Cairo lost power for 5 minutes. At that same time, his dog back in England let out a chilling howl and collapsed dead. Was it confirmed? No. Did anyone care? Also no, because the story was too perfect. A nobleman dies for disturbing a pharaoh's tomb. That's a pre-written Netflix script, printed in newspapers and sold out overnight. When the pharaoh wrote better headlines than the editor's reality, no one could read ancient Egyptian. No one understood the tomb inscriptions. There was no "he who opens this lid shall have his wallet drained at speed." No magical glow. But the press didn't need facts. They needed legend. The New York Times wrote, "Revenge from beyond the grave." The Daily Sketch printed a photo of Tutankhamun's golden mask with the caption, "He who stares into the eyes of the pharaoh shall never sleep again." From that point on, anyone who sneezed, stubbed a toe, or ate spoiled fish near the excavation site was blamed on the curse. What about science? The Egyptian medical community was just as bewildered. A forensic doctor in Cairo who examined Lord Carnarvon said, "He died from sepsis, most likely due to a mosquito bite." But when asked again by a Western journalist, "You mean the pharaoh sent the mosquito?" The doctor looked up at the sky, sighed, and changed professions. Supporting roles never get cursed. Funny thing is, the servant who carried the mummy, alive. The diggers, alive. The museum cleaner, alive. The guy who poked the pharaoh's body with a golden stick 4 times in a row, also alive. So if the curse is real, it seems to only apply to nobles with Wikipedia pages, curse or storytelling. Maybe there was no magic, no mysterious light, no God stepping out of the tomb, but there was a story. And like any good story, it needs someone to die at the right moment. A flickering lamp, and a mosquito who didn't follow protocol. This is a curse because you want to believe. You want to believe there's justice from the other side. You want to believe the dead can strike back. You want to believe the pharaoh is still there, even if just to strike lightning at the left cheek of a British nobleman without antibiotics. And maybe that's the real curse. We prefer curses over coincidence. We prefer gods over bacteria. If you think Pharaoh Tutankhamun cursed people with ancient magic, you might have missed something far scarier. A British newspaper on a deadline. When breaking news meant just made this up. On April 5th, 1923, British nobleman Lord Carnarvon died at the Continental Hotel in Cairo. Real cause, blood infection from a mosquito bite. But the media chose a very different one. The Daily Express ran the headline, "The curse strikes." The Times printed in bold, "Pharaoh takes his first victim." And the Daily Sketch, a kind of TikTok ancestor, published a photo of Tutankhamun's mask with a red caption, "He shall not be disturbed." No one asked, who said he was cursed? Is there any record from ancient Egypt confirming this? Did anyone talk to the pharaoh? No need. That creepy feeling sold papers better than breakfast pastries. Not pharaoh, but writers. If you thought the idea of a mummy rising for revenge was invented in 1923, please travel back to 1827. Jane Loudon, a British novelist, wrote a sci-fi story called The Mummy, A Tale of the 22nd Century. In it, the mummy returns to teach humans about morality and future technology. Yes, really. Louisa May Alcott, author of Little Women, also wrote the short story Lost in a Pyramid, 1869. A young woman takes seeds from a mummy's tomb, grows flowers, dies cursed. Who told her to garden without consulting the gods? In other words, the mummy's curse didn't come from the pyramids. It came from 19th century British Gothic fiction. Pharaohs wrote tombs, but curses were made up by writers with free afternoons. During the Tutankhamun excavation frenzy, the press didn't just rewrite history, they created an entire Egyptian horror cinematic universe. Some articles even printed prophecies found in the tomb, though no one actually found them. One journalist wrote, "I saw a shadow fly from the vent. It screeched in ancient Coptic," and he didn't need a source, because at the time, readers wanted to read what they wanted to believe. Historical humor. No fact-checking any actual inscription in the tomb saying curse. No. But there was one that said, "Let me rest." Maybe that was the polite version of a curse. Why did only nobles die while Egyptian locals stayed healthy? Because Egyptian citizens didn't have medical records reporters could dig up. Did Pharaoh really kill anyone? Maybe he just sat still. The press did the rest. What if I stole something from the tomb? You might get arrested for stealing antiquities. No curse needed. Mummies from divine figures to fashion icons right after the excavation and Carnarvon's death. Europe entered an Egyptomania phase, a cultural fever over Egypt. Vogue's cover featured a model wearing a crown like Tutankhamun. Toy stores sold mummy dolls for children. A Parisian company made chocolate mummies in sarcophagi, sweet but spooky. Women wore bracelets shaped like the Eye of Horus to ward off evil and look good in selfies. Tutankhamun, a king who died as a teenager, suddenly became a style icon, magical symbol, and fashionable disaster. He didn't live long, but he's more famous than King Charles now. Every odd death. One more chapter for the ghost story. After the first death, every minor mishap near the site became curse evidence. An Egyptian worker tripped and broke an ancient vase, cursed for touching sacred items. A sponsor got food poisoning at a banquet, punished for bad-mouthing the pharaoh. A tourist got lost from a tour and came back late, barely escaped death, meaning if you're in Egypt and accidentally slip, catch a cold, or drink unfiltered water, you're not sick. You've just been officially recognized by the European media as a curse victim, an unwanted honor. Where did the curse come from? Not from the pharaoh, not from stone walls, not from ancient scrolls, but from people who needed a story, from newspaper editors, from idle writers, from audiences who wanted to believe there was justice beyond death. Because if you believe an ancient king can rise from the grave just to give a British nobleman mild diarrhea, then you deserve your own front page spread. The pharaoh might not speak, but we never stop talking. Want to know who really wrote the curse? Not the gods, not the priests, not the hieroglyph carvers who spent lifetimes in temple shadows, but those with a 9 a.m. deadline and a headline scary enough to sell 400,000 copies. A small question, but one that haunted an entire century. If I open a 3,000-year-old Egyptian coffin, will I die instantly? And if not instantly, then how long before I evaporate? The victim list, selected to fit the headlines. Right after Lord Carnarvon's death, the newspapers began compiling not facts, but a list of people who might have been cursed. The list grew with every random death, every time someone fell down the stairs, choked on a grape, or caught a cold after visiting a museum. Someone added their name to the list. Death by illness, semi-believable. Lord Carnarvon, mosquito bite, infection, death. George J. Gould visited the tomb, high fever a few months later, death. Death, near the mummy, slightly chilling. Archibald Douglas Reed, engineer who X-rayed Tutankhamun's body, died suddenly. Richard Bethel, Carter's private secretary, died of asphyxiation in a hotel. A British nobleman died, capsizing his boat after a tomb opening celebration. Curse likelihood, 70%. Okay, now it's smelling a bit like old tomb. Death while holding an artifact. Oh. An antique dealer died right after selling a strip of mummy linen. A museum guard slipped, hit his head while dusting the golden mask. Curse likelihood, 90%. Now we're entering horror movie territory. Death with a postcard of Tut's face. Someone hit by a car after visiting an Egypt exhibit, holding a Tutankhamun postcard. A woman died while watching the 1932 film The Mummy. Right when the mummy opened its eyes. Curse likelihood, 100%. Not a normal death, but cinematic style. Why do we want the curse to be real? Humans hate randomness. A nobleman dies from a mosquito? Too meaningless. An engineer falls down the stairs? Too normal. A visitor gets a cold after the tomb tour? 100% expected. But if they die from a curse, suddenly that death has logic, a plot, a director behind it all, and most importantly, an audience ready to repost it in the paper. Death needs a storyline. No one wants to believe they die by accident. Everyone wants to believe someone is pulling the strings, even if that someone is a 19-year-old king who's been dead for 3,000 years, because at least, if you're cursed, you're special, you were chosen, and you have a reason to post one last status before you go. The people who never got cursed. Now let's talk about the survivors. There were many, but they didn't make the papers. Howard Carter, the first man to lay eyes on Tutankhamun's mummy, the one who took photos, opened the tomb, and handled the artifacts, lived to 64, no curse, no tooth loss, no divine diarrhea. Maybe the pharaoh thought he was too professional to punish. Or Carter wasn't a nobleman, so the media didn't bother framing him. Lady Evelyn Lord Carnarvon's daughter, present at the moment the tomb was opened, lived to 78, no scratches, no mysterious smoke. The diggers, the guys who hauled bricks, swept dirt, pushed carts, no one harmed, no newspaper mentions, no mysterious deaths. Maybe the curse didn't have the budget to cover the working class. What really killed people? Scientifically speaking, not gods, but mold. Modern researchers found Aspergillus flavus causes lung infections. Staphylococcus aureus, a golden staph bacteria, possibly from burial wrappings. Pseudomonas survives in dry, airless spaces. A group of microbiologists dubbed this combo the Mummy Squad. Ancient CSI file, the culprit's microbe, where it attacks danger level. Nickname, Aspergillus lungs. Bronchi medium high, the death breath. Staph aureus skin. Bloodstream high, the sneaky one. Pseudomonas eyes. Skin quiet, the stealth trickster. And when you inhale all three in a sealed tomb, sorry, that's not a curse, just poor judgment and no mask. Modern thought experiment. If this happened in 2024, a TikToker opens a tomb. Yo, I just found a cursed tomb. Day 1. Day 2, gets a sore throat. Day 3, video to our pharaoh, curse goes viral. Reddit thread, do mummies drain 5G energy? Twitter explodes, Elon Musk haunted by Pharaoh over bad tweet. Amazon starts selling essential mummy protection kit. Includes amulet, candle, and ibuprofen. 100% fake news, but someone will believe it. Not because they lack knowledge, but because they want to believe. Because an angry mummy is still more exciting than a vulnerable human body and strong microbes. Khan's soft footsteps echo. You are standing at the mouth of a tomb. It is dark, silent, ancient. And right next to you is a man with a moustache, a lantern, and nerves of steel, steady enough to look at a 3,000-year-old mummy and still pull out a measuring tape. Introduction. He wasn't a lord, just a man who knew how to read dust. Howard Carter, the man who wasn't cursed. He wasn't a nobleman, not a mystic. Didn't wear a white suit posing for photos with the mummy. Carter was the kind of man who walked into tombs with sketch paper, an oil lamp, and a soft brush. He didn't pray to the gods. He prayed for enough light to see the hieroglyphs on the wall. Born in 1874, Carter never attended university. Worked as a sketch artist reconstructing archaeological digs. Got fired multiple times for arguing with bosses and speaking too directly. But he was remarkably persistent. And he deeply believed that mummies weren't free enough to keep tabs on his every move. The first to see Tutankhamun, and lived long after. On November 26, 1922, Carter became the first man to shine a light into Tutankhamun's tomb after more than 3,200 years buried. He saw gold, statues, chariots, chests, and the sarcophagus. When Lord Carnarvon asked, "What do you see in there?" Carter simply replied, "Yes, wonderful things." There was no roar, no black smoke, no lightning or mummy gasping awake, just an archaeologist watching history unfold. He stayed for 10 years, no hair loss, no growling ghosts after opening the tomb. Carter worked in and around Tutankhamun's body for a decade. He touched the golden mask, unwrapped the burial linen, removed every ring, organized every chest, and he lived quite well. If the curse were real, Carter must have been on the white list. No death, no madness, no hallucinations of divine cats in the dark. Carter died in 1939 of lymphoma, age 64, compared to life expectancy at the time. Quite decent for a man who breathed tomb dust for 10 years. He didn't believe in curses, only in his paintbrush. Carter was once asked by a reporter, "Are you afraid of the Pharaoh's curse?" He replied, "I'm more afraid of misplacing an artifact." He lived in the real world, not the one built by newspapers. He wasn't a fan of stories about mummies who get angry. He just wanted to keep every bracelet, every scepter, in its rightful place. Pharaohs might be divine to others. To Carter, they were archaeological patients. Observations from his contemporaries. Many whispered, maybe Carter was protected by the gods. Maybe he was the chosen one. Carter himself said, "I just worked carefully, and I didn't poke artifacts like those at museum parties." He didn't show off, didn't self-promote, didn't take selfies with the mummy. There was no Instagram. He was just a man who did his job properly for a very long time and with intense precision, and maybe that helped him survive. A quick comparison. Carter's approach. There's the cursed crowd person behavior. Outcome, Lord Carnarvon. Shaved a mosquito bite. Through celebration party died of infection. Carter catalogued every artifact. Read hieroglyphs daily. Lived well for 17 more years. The press exaggerated every random death, created a global legend. Maybe the curse wasn't for the one who opened the tomb, but for those with too much imagination. The quiet footsteps in the sand. Howard Carter died in 1939 in Kensington, London. A small funeral. No growls, no golden mask. He was buried with a small inscription on his tombstone. May your spirit live. May you spend millions of years, you who love Thebes, sitting with your face to the north wind, your eyes beholding happiness. An ancient blessing for a man who simply wanted to understand the dead, not exploit them. Maybe the curse picked the wrong guy. Perhaps, if the pharaoh ever truly cursed someone, he would have chosen those who took his burial goods for display, printed his face on postcards, threw cocktail parties on top of his sarcophagus, not the one who sat beside an oil lamp, sketched every statue with a trembling hand, and annotated even broken pottery shards. You step into an ancient Egyptian tomb. The air is thick like beeswax, no breeze. The scent of incense and dry dust stings your lungs. And then you see a faint inscription carved into the stone wall. Whoever disturbs my sleep shall never see the light of the afterlife. You shiver. You turn to your companion and you whisper, "Bro, should we go back?" Did the ancient Egyptians really write curses in their tombs? Short answer, rare, very rare, almost non-existent. Among the hundreds of tombs excavated from the Valley of the Kings to Saqqara, very few contain threatening inscriptions. No line says, "Whoever enters will die." No, every step you take is a declaration of war. And absolutely none start with, "This tomb is protected by," insert supernatural being here. So what did ancient Egyptians actually write? They inscribed prayers. They carved guides to help the dead pass into the afterlife. And sometimes, gentle reminders. "Don't forget to leave me bread and beer on feast days." Sounds more like a graveside grocery request than a supernatural threat. So where did all the curses we hear come from? Sorry, but the ancient tomb curses you've heard of likely came from Hollywood scripts, 1950s comic books, or an overly dramatic tour guide. Even the famous inscription, "He who violates this tomb shall have his soul devoured by a lion," didn't come from Egypt. It came from a mistranslation by a 19th century French explorer. Hollywood's role, how tombs turned into mobile horror sets from The Mummy, 1932, The Curse of the Pharaoh, 1957, to the comedic reboot, 1999. Mummies always came with dramatic inscriptions found by flashlight. Hollywood loves this formula. A rich archaeology crew with one deeply superstitious character, a faded inscription. Someone reads it aloud in English with a deep voice. The door slams, lights go out, the mummy wakes up, tada! A cinematic curse is born. A few real inscriptions, but surprisingly polite. Some warning inscriptions do exist, but they're surprisingly courteous. Whoever disturbs this resting place shall be judged by the God who weighs the heart. Remember, the dead are the knowing, the living are the forgetful. Let silence preserve the sacred. See, no blood will rain, no thunder will strike. No, your Wi-Fi shall be eternally disabled. So even without magic, these warnings are still very real. Imagine this. You're a pharaoh. You spent your whole life building a tomb. You buried 40 tons of gold, 4 lacquered beds, 3 boxes of cosmetics, and 1 golden resume. Then you die, and you just hope to be left in peace. And if you can't curse, you might write, "Please don't come in. Don't lose my crown. Don't sell my toothbrush." The warnings weren't to scare. They were pleas, asking the living world to be kinder to the one that has fallen silent. Maybe we're the ones cursing ourselves. A mummy doesn't walk out of a sarcophagus, but a living person who sees a golden mask thinks, "Would look sick hanging in my living room." The ancient Egyptians didn't curse you. They just left notes hoping for peace. The storytellers after them, aka us, are the ones who added, "And if not granted peace, they will return." Maybe the curse never came from the other side of death, but from the living, who need death to come with consequences. Some words need no magic to make you fall silent. You might not believe in curses. You might walk into the tomb and laugh, touch the walls and joke around. But sometimes, a very small line, carved deep, without decoration, can make you pause, not from fear, but because you realize someone once lived, then died, and only wanted to be forgotten, fully. You opened a tomb. You held your breath. You felt something crawl in your lungs. It wasn't a curse. It's not a spirit. It's mold. Forget the gods. Forget glowing eyes in the dark. Forget raspy breathing from the sarcophagus. Let us introduce the real haunting team inside the tomb, also known as Microbiome of Doom, TM. They don't wear crowns. They don't wear linen, but they can give you a 104-degree fever in 3 hours. You're not being punished, you're getting infected. Your lungs are not made for 90% humidity, airborne fungal spores. Air older than organized religion, scientists ran experiments. They sampled air from a sealed tomb, found aspergillus spore density 15 times higher than safe levels. That's right. Step into the tomb and take a big whiff. You won't meet Anubis. You'll meet acute pneumonia. Scientists. Cursed. Inside the lab. In 1997, a research team at the Munich Museum analysed ancient mummy wrappings. 2 scientists developed high fevers. No mummy rose. No ghost hand grabbed their ankles. Just a strong biological reaction to 3,000-year-old mold dust. Afterward, major museums created new rules. Mummy storage rooms must have hospital-grade air filters. Anyone handling original remains must wear N95-level fungal masks. The Pharaoh's curse, as seen through a doctor's lens. A 2001 study from the University of Hawaii examined 58 individuals involved in the Tutankhamun tomb. Deaths within the first 10 years. 8 among them. 4 had pre-existing respiratory issues. 2 died for unclear reasons, aka post-banquet low blood pressure. 2 were elderly over 70. Conclusion: no statistical evidence of abnormal death rate, but there was evidence of bacterial and spore exposure. In other words, you weren't killed by a dead king. You were ambushed by the micro-ecosystem inside his coffin. The curse wasn't supernatural. It was microscopic. And so, microbiologists got creative. They coined the term biocurse, the biological curse. It doesn't glow black, It doesn't roar. It just gives you shortness of breath, itchy eyes, drowsiness, and endless coughing after you step into a mummy vault. Hollywood won't make movies about it. But doctors know. A curse doesn't need drama, just enough time, moisture, and no air. So why do some people stay fine? Howard Carter lived. Lady Evelyn lived. Dozens of porters lived long lives. Because they didn't poke things that didn't need poking, worked fast, didn't breathe deep, and drank clean water. Sometimes a person cursed is just not wearing a mask, not vaccinated, and too confident that spooky death won't choose me. If I enter a tomb today, what happens? If you walk into a sealed 3,000-year-old tomb today with no protection, no airflow, then, after 5 minutes, itchy throat, 10 minutes, watery eyes, blurred vision, 2 hours later, mild fever, coughing, 12 hours later, hospitalized with pneumonia or systemic allergic reaction, and you might die in 48 hours, then get a headline that reads, "Cursed to death." And just like that, a new generation believes again. Maybe the curse is just a very determined bacteria. Maybe you don't believe in curses. Maybe you're a logical person. Maybe you've had your shots and wash your hands daily. But you're still not immune to mold, still not resistant to ancient spore dust, and definitely not safe from what happens when you breathe too deeply in a place that was never meant to echo with the sound of lungs again. Imagine you're living in 1923. You're in Egypt. It's 111 You get bitten by a mosquito on your left cheek. No bug repellent, no ice, and definitely no antibiotics. Congratulations. You're now fully qualified to be cursed. 1. Let's go back to Lord Carnarvon. What did he die of? Back to the legendary victim, Lord Carnarvon. As we mentioned in Chapter 1, he was bitten by a mosquito, and like every 1920s British nobleman, he scratched hard, to the point, the skin tore, under conditions of heat that could bake bread, no clean water, no antibacterial soap, and a slightly crooked immune system due to middle age. The wound got infected, then turned into sepsis. There was no penicillin, invented in 1928, not widely used, and so he died. But newspapers didn't print. Man dies due to pre-modern healthcare system. They printed, Pharaoh is angry. 2. If you lived in 1923, everything felt like a curse symptom. Medical explanation, press interpretation. High fever dehydration. Malaria, drained by a ghost's energy. Dry cough. Environmental pneumonia, the breath of death. Stomach ache. Salted fish poisoning cursed by a serpent god. Rash mummy linen allergy marked by Anubis. In other words, if you lived in 1923 and had a cough, you didn't need a curse. You just needed no Tylenol. 3. List of things that didn't exist when the victims died. Penicillin, not yet widely available. Ibuprofen, not invented. Surgical masks, no one thought of them. Digital thermometers, wishful thinking. Google, no way to search, is mouth ulcer a curse? And let's not forget, no mosquito spray, no air purifiers, no vaccine except the vaccine of hope. You only had eucalyptus leaves, faith, and a paper fan. 4. Truth. Most cursed people lived in an era of limited medicine, and to be fair, they travelled by steamship, slept in canvas tents, inhaled tomb dust, drank unboiled water, ate canned food preserved by pure optimism. If they survived, that'd be strange. Not surviving didn't require a curse, just an immune system that flirted with the wrong microbe. 5. The cursed deaths. Read them as a doctor, not a screenwriter name. Real cause press version. George J. Gould. Infection from fever. Pharaoh struck after he left the tomb. Douglas Reed. Anaphylactic shock. The mummy released toxins. Richard Bethel. Suffocation in Hotel Carter's right hand. Silence forever. No supernatural drama. Just poor hygiene, brutal weather, and weak constitutions. 6. Think the desert is dry? Go study geography again. Egypt is a place where days are scorching dry, nights slice through your skin, air is filled with fine dust, winds can carry mold spores. If you live there for months, dig in dirt, breathe dust, and dine like a luxury nomad. Then getting a fever, chest pain, or diarrhea is just part of the journey. But put a mummy nearby. That becomes cinema. 7. If the curse is real, why only target people with bad health history? Stats show all the cursed victims were with pre-existing conditions, elderly, severely stressed, or rich and visible in the media. Meanwhile, the coffin carriers, temple guards, coffin polishers, all perfectly fine. Seems the curse came with tiered insurance. Maybe the pharaoh didn't plan to kill you. Maybe he was just sleeping, very deeply, very peacefully. And it was us, with fragile bodies, wild imaginations, and weak AC, who caused the consequences. The curse didn't begin with linen wraps. It began when you walked in, with a sickly body, no meds, and high expectations. Sometimes, we don't need evidence to believe in something. We just need a reason not to feel empty. 1. Because randomness is the scariest thing. Someone dies of a fever. Someone falls down the stairs. Someone catches a cold and dies on an excavation trip. All three are ordinary. But you don't want to believe that. You don't want to think life ends for reasons no one cares about. You want to think there must be a reason. Someone must be behind it. There must be justice, even if it comes from a mummy in a golden crown. 2. Because believing in the curse gives everything a plot. Humans are storytelling creatures. We can't stand plot holes. We hate endings without closure. So, a random death. Maybe it's karma. A persistent cough. Perhaps a spirit is collecting its debt. The truth is, sad things without meaning are more upsetting than sad things with mystical consequences. 3. The curse turns the dead into active characters. Tutankhamun died young. He left no significant political legacy. Died from falling off a horse. Malaria. A broken leg. No one's sure. But when we say he's killed people from beyond the grave, suddenly he becomes a powerful figure. It's how we comfort the dead, with imagined power. 4. The curse is how humans explain what they can't control. Let's look back at history. Era phenomenon, initial explanation, ancient Greece thunder. Zeus is angry, Middle Ages plagues. Haunted, witches to blame 20th century death after digging Pharaoh's revenge. When you don't understand, you rewrite. When you're scared, you call it magic. And when you want life to have consequences, you call it a curse. 5. Because believing in a curse is more fun than believing in bacteria. A newspaper headline: engineer dies from mold toxins in seal tomb. You go, meh. But if the paper says, engineer dies after touching Tutankhamun's mask, 3 hours after gas leak, you click, you share, you make a movie. Mold. No ratings. Angry mummy. Netflix already called. 6. The curse helps us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. Here's the strange thing. When you think you've been cursed, you're believing that someone who's been dead for 3,000 years still knows who you are, still notices what you do, still sees your mistakes. There's something comforting about being noticed. 7. Because being cursed is a legacy better than being forgotten. You die of old age. No one remembers your name. You die because you touch the pharaoh's sacred items. You're in the news. You're in historical documentaries. You're on Wikipedia. You have rumors swirling around you. And sometimes, for those who fear being forgotten, being linked to a curse is better than disappearing. A curse may not be real, but the fear of loneliness is there may be no mummy waking up at night, no eyes staring from the void, no green light glowing from disturbed relics, but something inside us still wants to believe that every action has a consequence. And if that consequence is delivered by an ancient god in a gold skirt, it's easier to swallow than accepting the truth. This life has always been chaotic and unfair from the very beginning. Imagine this. You spend your whole life planning your death. You write down prayers. You build a house for your soul. And when you're finally gone, someone breaks in and calls your final wish a curse. 1. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the end to ancient Egyptian culture. Death was a journey, not a shutdown, not a power off, but a long trip requiring a passport, backup snacks, and moral paperwork. You needed a tomb, preferably anti-theft, a soul guidebook called the Book of the Dead, and an intact body not tampered with by future generations. They didn't write curses. They wrote soul protection contracts. 2. What we call curses, they called prayers. Egyptians carved texts in tombs that said, "Please don't take my food. O passing traveller, if you leave a blessing, I shall return it upon your children. Those who disturb this sleep shall have no place in the afterlife." Not to threaten, but to set boundaries. You don't call a no trespassing sign a curse, right? 3. To them, intactness was sacred, not a threat. An intact mummy. The soul can recognize the body and continue its life. A moved artifact. The soul may get lost. And if the soul can't find itself again, that person cannot be reborn. So if you're a pharaoh and you carefully prepared everything, food, makeup kit, a resume engraved in stone, and 42 copies of your theological profile, then someone walks in, breaks a wine jar, takes your amulet, and calls that a cultural discovery. Wouldn't you feel slightly disrespected? 4. They called it Ma'at, the balance of the universe to the Egyptians. The universe exists thanks to one principle, Ma'at, order, truth, harmony, and justice. Any act that violated Ma'at, lying, tomb robbing, moving sacred objects, was considered a crack in the structure of the universe. No need for divine punishment. The universe itself would collapse quietly. A curse wasn't something someone shouted. It was a ripple from a sacred imbalance. 5. Maybe we're the ones who called it the wrong name. The modern ones, fear silence. See a tomb. It's cursed. Read a solemn inscription. The dead are angry. But maybe the Egyptians weren't angry. They were just asking, please don't take the charm. Please don't disturb the tomb. Please say my name once more, so I may still exist. They didn't write to scare you. They wrote to remind themselves that they once were here. 6. To them. Death was a pleasant journey. Don't drop the vase. The dead didn't want to haunt you. They wanted to pass through the field of reeds, where souls harvest grain in eternal peace. They wanted to arrive in beauty, fully equipped, and not missing a sandal. If you enter the tomb and mess things up, you're creating a spiritual traffic jam. They didn't curse us. We just mistranslated everything. Maybe the curse was never written. Just words like, please let me rest. Please say my name, so I may live again. Please don't forget me. And we, the readers, saw that loneliness and mistook it for rage. You've heard about the Pharaoh's curse, about the mosquito, about the mummy, about the mold. But maybe the real curse has nothing to do with death. It has to do with something more painful. Disappearance. 1. No one comes back, but no one stays forever. The Pharaoh thought he'd live forever. Tutankhamun built a tomb, left behind a golden mask, buried gods, beds, perfume. But thousands of years passed, and no one said his name. No prayers, no holiday goose-fat offerings. No one remembered his birthday. No one remembered that he was a real person. Until his tomb was unearthed, and they gave him names never carved on any wall. The curse, the killer, the vengeful god. 2. The real curse might be, you will be called by another name. Not you will die, but you will return, but no one will remember who you were. They will speak of you, but in their words, in their voice, for their reasons. You, a boy who died at 19, suddenly become the villain in a blockbuster, played by actors. Your biography rewritten into a movie script, not cursed to die, cursed to be misunderstood. 3. Or maybe the curse is, no one believes you ever existed. Tutankhamun has no grand monuments, no military victories, no surviving love letters, no painting of him smiling. The world only remembers the deaths around him. No one asks, how did he live? And that might be the real curse. Your existence reduced to a sensational headline. 4. Or the curse is, someone else's name will be engraved on your bones. You die. Then they come. Take the things you brought. Write their names on plaques. Go on TV, retelling the journey of finding you, as if you were an anonymous treasure. They become famous. They get statues. They're called the one who discovered the Pharaoh. And you're no longer the one found. You become the thing dug up. 5. Maybe the curse is, I am no longer allowed to rest. You carefully planned your sleep, buried yourself among prayers, sealed the tomb with spells, locked each stone in place, and left one final line. Please do not break this silence. And then it gets smashed, filmed, released in 4K on Netflix. You don't wake, but you don't get to sleep either. The real curse is the one we spoke into existence. Maybe the curse never belonged to the pharaoh. Maybe he was just the one who paid the price for our curiosity, for our rewriting, for the unending need to make the past more thrilling than it truly was. The curse, perhaps, is a collective act, a deliberate forgetting, a noise loud enough to blur what should have been quietly preserved. Everyone says they respect the dead, but in truth, we don't let them rest. We raise them up, we photograph them, and we attach them to stories they may never have wanted to be told. 1. Monuments for the living, built on the bones of the dead. When a mummy is unearthed, 3 things happen. A scholar gains a new title, a museum opens a full exhibit, and a historical figure loses their chance to ever sleep again. They are no longer a person. They become an image, a mask printed on a t-shirt, a name forever tied to an unsolved mystery. No one asks, how would he have liked to be remembered? 2. Memory that's not true becomes fiction. The ancient Egyptians carved their names in stone because they believed a name is part of the soul. But now, their names are misread, mistranslated, attached to stories that never existed. They were once people who had mothers, who had friends, who got annoyed when it was too hot. Now they are side characters in action films, a meme, a walking artifact. Is that remembrance, or a made-up version, repeated long enough to seem real? 3. Those who are never left alone. Are those still useful to us? The pharaoh is displayed. The mummy is relocated. Fragments are glued together to inspire history. Meanwhile, the tomb raiders are forgotten. The coffin bearers go unnamed. The slave women buried with them have no articles written. There is a quiet injustice. The ones we put on pedestals are those who can no longer object. 4. Some just wanted to sleep, but have been called forward for millennia. Not everyone wanted immortality. Not everyone dreamed of becoming a mystery. Some souls only needed a long enough rest, without interruption, without their linens undone, without being taken around the world in a glass box, but because they lay in a tomb filled with gold, they lost the right to rest. 5. Is a monument really memory? We build statues to remember, but also to simplify. Statues don't talk, they don't object, they don't retell their own truth. We only hear what we want to hear, and their real name, real voice, real gaze. We left those behind in the first layer of sand we brushed away. 6. The curse isn't in the tomb, it's outside the museum gates. Maybe the tomb never cursed anyone. Maybe the body was never angry. Maybe the most sacred thing is to be left alone when one has prepared to be left alone. And the real curse is when we refuse to let anyone disappear, but also refuse to let them remain as they were. Some names are carved in stone, but the souls are stamped on promotional flyers. Tutankhamun. Not a brand, not a supernatural icon, just a sickly boy who died young and is remembered by the world in every way he never asked for. Maybe he was never angry. He just couldn't say, "Please don't put me on display in Ohio."